Sawito bought an old farm for $6,000, but what she found there was terrifying. Margaret Wilson trembled as she held the rusty keys in her hands. 2 years and 3 months had passed since she lost Robert, and the decision to spend her last savings on a property she hadn't even seen in person seemed increasingly desperate. Now facing the wooden gate that creaked in the cold wind of the Appalachian Mountains, she questioned whether she had made the biggest mistake of her life. The real estate agent had disappeared with the commission money right after the papers were signed, and the $6,000 she paid for Pine Ridge Farm were all that remained from the sale of her old furniture. The rain had just stopped, leaving the red earth soaked under her bare feet. Margaret adjusted her blonde bun that kept coming undone and pulled up her long cotton skirt to keep it from dragging in the mud. She had purposely worn her simplest clothes for this moment, as if she could better connect with the rural life she had chosen. The 2-story house stood before her like a ghost from the past. The wooden boards, darkened by time, contrasted with the window frames without glass, which seemed like empty eyes watching her arrival. The zinc roof had holes where vegetation was already beginning to grow, and the front porch hung dangerously to one side. She took a deep breath and walked along the path of uneven stones leading to the main door. Each step echoed a mix of courage and despair. At 42 years old, Margaret knew this was her last chance to start over. Returning to the city would mean accepting the miserable pension and living off the charity of her in-laws who had always treated her like an intruder. The door creaked as it opened, revealing a dark hallway that smelled of mold and years of abandonment. Margaret fumbled for a light switch, but soon remembered that the power had been cut off long ago. She turned on her phone's flashlight and took her first steps into her new home. It was then that she saw the letters, dozens of them scattered across the wooden floor, as if someone had dumped a box of mail and run off. Margaret bent down and picked up the first one she found. The yellowed paper was addressed to Mrs. Elizabeth Parker, in faded, cursive handwriting. Her heart almost stopped. Elizabeth Parker was her maiden name. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. The letter was dated 1963 and talked about that year's coffee harvest, signed by someone named Jack. She picked up another letter, then another, all addressed to the same Elizabeth Parker, all from past decades. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. Margaret sat on the dirty floor, surrounded by correspondence that seemed to tell the life story of a person with her name. One of the letters, dated 1967, talked about Elizabeth Parker's marriage to a man named Benjamin. Another, from 1971, commented on the construction of a new barn on the property. As she read, a strange feeling came over her, as if she were invading memories that didn't belong to her, but somehow made sense. The writing revealed a determined woman who had turned that farm into a prosperous coffee business for decades. The sound of footsteps on the porch made her stand up quickly. Through the window without glass, she saw the silhouette of a tall man approaching the door. Margaret hid some letters in her skirt pocket and walked to the entrance. "Excuse me, are you the new owner?" the man asked, removing a worn hat from his head. Margaret observed the visitor carefully. He must have been about 50, with sunburned skin, simple but clean clothes. There was something familiar about his features, although she was certain she had never seen him before. "I'm Margaret Wilson." "And you are?" "Sebastian Parker." He paused as if expecting some reaction. "I'm the cousin of the late Benjamin Parker, who owned this farm for 40 years. The name Benjamin made Margaret remember the letters. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but felt something important was being revealed. "I imagine you've come to welcome me to the neighborhood," said Margaret, forcing a smile. Sebastian shook his head slowly. "Actually, I came because I heard about the sale and need to clarify something. This farm couldn't have been sold." Margaret felt her stomach tighten. "What do you mean? I have all the documentation. I paid $6,000 and the deed has already been transferred to my name." "You've been deceived." Sebastian climbed the porch steps and stopped very close to her. "This property has belonged to my family for 3 generations. Benjamin left a will leaving everything to the direct heirs. I'm the only one alive." "That's impossible. The agent showed me all the documentation, Everything is registered at the Mount Pleasant courthouse. Sebastian laughed bitterly. That so-called agent disappeared, didn't he? Took your money and vanished. You were the victim of a well-planned scam. Margaret felt her legs go weak. If it were true, she had lost her last savings and had nowhere to go. Her widow's pension wouldn't even be enough to rent a small room in the city. I have the documents here in my suitcase. I'll get them for you to see. As Margaret walked to the car, Sebastian watched the house with a possessive look. She returned with a folder of documents and handed it to him. Sebastian examined the papers with excessive care, as if he already knew what he would find. These documents are fake. Look at this signature here. He pointed to a line at the end of the deed. This isn't Notary Olsen's handwriting. I've known his writing for 20 years. Margaret took the documents back and examined them carefully. She couldn't tell if anything was wrong, but the certainty in Sebastian's voice made her increasingly nervous. Even if there were some problem with the documentation, I paid in good faith. I have rights. You have the right to sue whoever deceived you, but you can't stay on a property that isn't yours. I'm not leaving here. Margaret surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. I invested everything I had. If there's a legal issue, we'll resolve it in court. Sebastian put his hat back on and descended the steps. You're making a mistake. This farm... He hesitated for a moment. This farm brings bad luck. Ask the older neighbors. They'll tell you no family can prosper here. I don't believe in superstitions. They're not superstitions, Mrs. Wilson. It's history. This property has destroyed 2 families. You could be the third. Sebastian walked to the gate without looking back. Margaret watched until he disappeared around the bend in the dirt road. Only then did she realize her knees were trembling. She went back inside the house with 1,000 thoughts running through her head. If Sebastian was telling the truth, she had nothing left in the world, but something in his posture, in the way he looked at the property, suggested there was more behind his words. Margaret decided to examine the letters she had found more carefully. Perhaps there were clues about the true history of that place. She lit a candle she had brought from the city and spread the correspondence on the living room floor. As she read, she began to notice a pattern. The first letters from the 1960s spoke of prosperity. Elizabeth Parker and Benjamin had turned the farm into one of the most productive in the region. But starting in 1975, the tone changed drastically. A letter from 1976 mentioned growing debts. Another, from 1978, talked about selling part of the land. In 1980, Elizabeth Parker wrote to a brother in Denver, asking to borrow money. The last letter found was from 1982. In it, Elizabeth Parker was saying goodbye to a friend, explaining she would be forced to leave the farm because she couldn't pay the debts. The shaky handwriting revealed deep suffering. Poor thing, Margaret murmured to herself. She had to abandon the entire life she built here. It was at that moment that she heard footsteps on the upper floor of the house. Margaret froze. The footsteps were clear, as if someone was walking slowly along the second-floor hallway. She quickly blew out the candle and stayed completely silent, listening. The footsteps stopped right above where she was. Then the sound of something being dragged across the wooden floor. Margaret felt her heart race. She grabbed her phone's flashlight and aimed it at the ceiling, as if she could see through the floorboards. Total silence for a few minutes. Then the footsteps started again, this time coming down the back stairs of the house. Margaret considered running to the car, but something stopped her. Maybe it was desperation, maybe courage, but she decided to investigate. She lit the candle again and walked toward the sound. The back stairs led to the house's old kitchen. Margaret climbed slowly, making each step creak under her weight. The first floor had 3 bedrooms and a narrow hallway. All the doors were open. She examined each room with the flickering candlelight. In the last room, she found something that made her step back. On a small, worm-eaten wooden table, there was an open photo album. The visible photo showed a woman with blonde hair tied in a bun, wearing a long skirt and a dark blouse. The resemblance to Margaret was disturbing. She approached and turned the page. More photos of the same woman, always on the farm, always smiling. One of the photos showed her next to a tall man with a mustache, probably Benjamin. The couple was in front of the house, which in the photos appeared well-maintained and painted white. Margaret continued flipping through. The photos seemed to tell the happy life of a couple on the farm during the 1960s and 1970s, but in the last pages, the joy disappeared. The woman appeared alone, with an increasingly sad expression. The house in the background also showed signs of growing deterioration. The last photo in the album showed Elizabeth Parker standing exactly in the same spot where Margaret Wilson had stood this morning. The position was identical, back to the camera, looking at the house with the same melancholy posture. Margaret closed the album firmly. The coincidence was terrifying. It was as if she was following in the footsteps of someone who had lived there decades before, someone who had her name, and apparently her appearance too. She hurried down the stairs, but tripped on the last step and fell on the kitchen floor. The candle rolled and went out, leaving her in total darkness. When she managed to turn on her phone's flashlight, she saw that she had knocked over a pile of old plates that were on the counter. That's when she noticed something shining among the shards. It was a small key, different from the ones she had received from the realtor. Margaret picked it up and examined it in the flashlight's beam. It seemed to be the key to a safe or cabinet. She went back to the living room and decided she would continue the investigation the next day. She took some letters and the photo album, locked the house, and drove to town to spend the night at Mrs. Collins' boarding house. In the small room of the boarding house, Margaret spread the letters on the bed and tried to organize a timeline of events. Elizabeth Parker had arrived at the farm as a bride in 1963. She had lived 20 happy years with Benjamin. Starting in 1975, financial problems began. In 1982, she was forced to leave the property. But what happened afterward? And where was Benjamin during the final years? The letters only spoke of Elizabeth Parker facing the difficulties alone. Margaret picked up her phone and decided to research the farm's history. She typed Elizabeth Parker Pine Ridge Farm into the search engine. She found nothing. She searched Benjamin Parker Coffee, Colorado. Some results appeared, but nothing specific about the farm. It was almost midnight when she finally fell asleep. Her dreams were filled with images of the woman from the photographs, always with her back turned, always walking toward the old house. Margaret woke before dawn with a strange feeling. She had dreamed that someone was knocking on her bedroom door, but when she awoke, everything was silent. She got up, took a quick shower, and went down to have coffee with Mrs. Collins. "How was your first night at the farm, dear?" the elderly lady asked as she poured coffee with milk. "Actually, I slept here at the boarding house. The house still doesn't have electricity." Mrs. Collins stopped stirring the coffee and looked at Margaret with a worried expression. "So you really did buy Pine Ridge Farm?" "I did. Why do you ask like that?" "Child, that property hasn't brought anyone luck for a long time. The older folks avoid even going near it." Margaret felt a shiver. This was the second person in less than 24 hours talking about bad luck related to the farm. "Do you know the story of the place?" Mrs. Collins hesitated, as if deciding how much to reveal. "I knew Benjamin and Elizabeth well. They were a very beloved couple here in town. She was an outsider, came from upstate New York to get married. For years they were very happy. And what happened? Benjamin started drinking, first only on weekends, then every day. Elizabeth tried to help, but he got worse and worse. He lost entire harvests because he couldn't work properly. Margaret remembered the letters that spoke of growing debts. And where is Benjamin now? Mrs. Collins lowered her voice, as if telling a secret. No one knows. One day, he simply disappeared. Elizabeth was left alone with all the debts. She tried to hold on to the property for a few more years, but couldn't manage. And her? What happened to Elizabeth Parker? She disappeared too. People said she went to the big city to try to start over, but no one ever heard from her again. Margaret felt a lump in her throat. Elizabeth Parker's story echoed her own experience of loss and starting over. "Do you think there are any living relatives? Someone who could tell me more details? As far as I know, only Sebastian is left. He's a distant cousin of Benjamin's and always insisted that the farm should have stayed in the family." Margaret nearly choked on her coffee. Sebastian Parker. That's the one. A bitter man, always complaining that he was wronged in the inheritance. He lives on a small homestead on the other side of town. Margaret quickly finished her coffee and said goodbye to Mrs. Collins. She needed to return to the farm and better understand what Sebastian really wanted. There was something strange about how he appeared on the very first day, as if he were watching the property. During the drive back, Margaret noticed she was being followed by a red pickup truck. She slowed down to confirm, and the vehicle slowed too. She accelerated on a straight stretch, and the pickup accelerated along with her. When she reached the farm gate, the pickup stopped a few yards behind. Margaret got out of her car and walked toward the vehicle. The driver rolled down the window. "Sebastian, why are you following me?" "I'm not following anyone. This road also leads to my property." He pointed to a narrow trail that opened into the woods. "I just wanted to make sure you understood our conversation yesterday. I understood perfectly. But until there's a court decision, I'll continue taking care of my property." Sebastian turned off the engine and got out of the pickup. "You don't understand. It's not just a legal matter. This farm, and it changes people. Those who stay here too long end up what? Obsessed. Just like Elizabeth Parker. She became so attached to this place that she preferred to lose everything rather than leave. In the end, he went mad." Margaret felt anger growing inside her. "You were talking about bad luck, about destroyed families. Now you talk about madness. What really happened here?" Sebastian looked at the house as if seeing ghosts. "My cousin Benjamin was a strong, hard-working man. After he married that woman and came to live here, he became a different person. He started drinking, having nightmares, saying he heard voices in the house. Voices. He said that at dawn he heard people walking upstairs, doors slamming, furniture being dragged. Margaret swore she heard it too but didn't want to leave. Margaret remembered the footsteps she heard the night before. It could have been some animal. An abandoned house attracts animals. An animal that opens and closes doors? An animal that turns on lights in the bedrooms?" Sebastian shook his head. "You'll find out for yourself. I just hope it's not too late when you decide to leave." He got into the pickup truck and drove off down the forest trail, leaving Margaret alone with her troubled thoughts. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Margaret entered the house determined to find concrete answers. She took the small key she had found among the debris and began searching for locks it could open. She checked all the rooms on the ground floor without success. On the first floor, she carefully examined every old piece of furniture that remained. It was in the room where she had found the photo album that she discovered an old desk with a locked drawer. The key fit perfectly. Inside the drawer, she found more letters, some old coins, and a leather notebook with yellowed pages. Margaret opened the notebook to the first page. It was a personal diary of Elizabeth Parker, started in 1963. March 15th, 1963. Today I married Benjamin and came to live at the farm. The house is bigger than I imagined, and the mountain view is beautiful. Benjamin promised me we would be very happy here. Margaret continued reading, skipping between pages to follow the year's progression. June 10th, 1968. The crops are doing well this year. Benjamin is excited about the harvest. Maybe we can buy the new tractor he wants so much. November 23rd, 1971. We celebrated 8 years of marriage today. Benjamin threw a party for the whole town. Sometimes I'm frightened by so much happiness. Do we deserve all this? Margaret skipped to the pages from the late 1970s. September 14th, 1978. Benjamin started drinking again yesterday. He said he can't sleep properly, that he hears strange noises in the house. I tried to convince him they're just the normal creaks of old wood, but he doesn't believe me. January 30th, 1980. I had to sell another piece of land to pay the debts. Benjamin is getting worse. Yesterday he swore he saw a woman in a white dress in the hallway. I'm starting to worry about his mental health. July 18th, 1981. Benjamin has been missing for 3 days. I found a note saying he can't stand living here anymore. I'm alone for the first time in 18 years. I don't know what to do. Margaret felt a tightness in her chest. Elizabeth Parker's situation was even more painful than she had imagined. She continued reading the final entries. December 5th, 1981. I started hearing the noises Benjamin mentioned. Footsteps upstairs, doors opening by themselves. This morning I found all the kitchen chairs stacked in the center of the living room. I know I didn't do it. March 20th, 1982. I can no longer distinguish between reality and imagination. The noises are constant. Sometimes I see shadows moving in my peripheral vision. Maybe Benjamin was right. Maybe this house really has something wrong with it. April 2nd, 1982. This will be my last entry. I've lost the farm for good. The bank foreclosed on the mortgage. I have to leave in 2 weeks, but I confess I feel a strange relief. Perhaps far from here I can become the person I was before. Margaret closed the diary and remained silent for several minutes. The similarity between her story and Elizabeth Parker's went far beyond name and appearance. Both had lost their husbands, both had come to that farm seeking a fresh start, both had faced unexplained problems. But there was one important difference. Margaret Wilson didn't believe in ghosts or hauntings. She was certain there was a rational explanation for everything that was happening. She decided to run a test. She returned to the ground floor and arranged some objects in specific ways. She placed 3 chairs in a row in the living room, left a pot on the kitchen stove, and leaned a broom against the porch wall. If she found the objects in different positions in the morning, she would know someone was entering the house during the night. And if someone was entering, it was probably Sebastian trying to scare her away. Margaret decided to spend the night at the farm to catch the intruder. She brought a sleeping bag from her car and settled in the main room, where she could watch both the front door and the staircase leading to the second floor. By 10 at night, everything was quiet. Margaret read the letters by flashlight, trying to find some clue she could use against Sebastian. That's when she found a letter different from the others, dated 1985. This letter wasn't addressed to Elizabeth Parker, but to a lawyer in Denver. It was a carbon copy of correspondence Elizabeth Parker had sent 3 years after leaving the farm. Dr. Andrew, as we discussed, I'm sending a copy of my late father-in-law, Jack Parker's will, dated 1955. As you can see, the document leaves Pine Ridge Farm to the first woman of the Parker family who returns to care for the property. When I married Benjamin, I became a Parker. Even after our separation, I legally maintain this surname. I would like your opinion on my legal rights, should I decide to claim the inheritance. Margaret read the letter 3 times to make sure she understood. If the 1955 will still had legal validity, and if Elizabeth Parker never officially claimed the inheritance, the farm's legal situation was much more complicated than Sebastian had suggested. It was nearly midnight when Margaret heard the first noise, a soft creak, as if someone were cautiously stepping on the upstairs floorboards. She immediately turned off the flashlight and remained completely silent. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, moving from the back bedroom to the hallway. Margaret grabbed her phone and activated the audio recording function. She wanted evidence that someone was breaking into the house. The footsteps came down the back staircase and stopped in the kitchen. Margaret heard the sound of something being dragged across the floor, then the noise of chairs being moved. She rose silently and walked toward the kitchen, recording everything. When she reached the doorframe, she pointed the flashlight into the room and turned it on. There was no one there, but the 3 pots that had been on the stove now formed a perfect stack on the table. The broom, which she had left on the porch, stood in the center of the kitchen, balanced upright on its own. Margaret felt a chill down her spine. She was absolutely certain she had heard footsteps and sounds of objects being moved. The audio recording would confirm it. But how to explain that there was no one in the kitchen? She examined all the doors and windows. They remained locked exactly as she had left them. There were no signs of break-in or forced entry. Margaret returned to the living room but couldn't sleep anymore. She stayed awake until dawn, watching every shadow, listening to every noise. Around 5 in the morning, she heard the footsteps upstairs again, but this time she didn't investigate. When the sun rose, she left the house and stood on the porch, breathing the fresh morning air. She tried to find a rational explanation for what she had witnessed. It was then that she saw an elderly lady walking along the dirt road toward the farm. The woman wore a floral dress and a straw hat and carried a basket in her hands. "Good morning, dear," the lady said when she reached the gate. "I'm Abigail Anderson. I live in the White House across the valley. I came to welcome the new neighbor." Margaret stepped down from the porch and went to greet Mrs. Anderson. "Thank you very much. I'm Margaret Wilson." "Margaret," the lady repeated the name with a nostalgic smile. "What an interesting coincidence. Did you know Elizabeth Parker?" "I knew her very well. We were close friends all the years she lived here." Mrs. Anderson looked at the house with a melancholy expression. "You two look surprisingly alike." "I found some old letters of hers scattered around the house, and a diary too." "Ah, yes. Elizabeth always liked to write. She was a very cultured woman, came from the capital." Mrs. Anderson hesitated for a moment. "I imagine you've also found the stories about the strange phenomena in the house." Margaret decided to be direct. "Do you believe there's something supernatural here?" Mrs. Anderson laughed softly. "My dear, at 78 years old, I've seen a lot in this life. I've learned that not everything has a simple explanation." "But what did you actually see? Not the rumors, not the stories. What did you witness with your own eyes?" The lady became serious. "One winter night in 1980, Elizabeth called me desperately. She said she couldn't stand being alone in the house anymore. I came to spend the night here with her." Mrs. Anderson paused for a moment, as if reliving the memory. "We heard footsteps upstairs all night, voices whispering in the hallway, and in the morning we found all the bedroom doors open, even though we had left them all closed." "And what did you think it was?" "I don't know, but I can tell you one thing. Elizabeth wasn't imagining things. She was a sensible, level-headed person. If she said there was something strange here, then there really was." Margaret felt a mix of relief and worry. At least she wasn't going crazy. "Do you know anything about a will from 1955, from Benjamin's father?" Mrs. Anderson raised her eyebrows. "Jack Parker? Of course I remember him. He was a very specific man about his wishes. He always said the farm should go to someone who truly loved this place." "And did Elizabeth Parker love it?" "Absolutely. She loved this land more than Benjamin himself. When she was forced to leave, she was devastated. She said she'd rather go hungry here than live in abundance anywhere else." Margaret felt a strange connection to the woman she had never met. "Do you know if she ever contested the loss of the property legally?" "She tried, but she didn't have money to hire a lawyer, and Sebastian pressured her heavily to give up." "Was Sebastian already involved at that time?" "Sebastian always envied this farm. Even when Benjamin and Elizabeth were prosperous, he already said the property should have stayed with the Blood family." Margaret thanked her for the information and invited Mrs. Anderson for coffee, but the lady declined, saying she needed to return home. "One last thing, dear. If you decide to stay, be very careful with Sebastian. He's capable of anything to get what he wants." After Mrs. Anderson left, Margaret went back inside the house with more questions than answers. She decided to look for the will that Elizabeth Parker had mentioned in the letter to the lawyer. She examined all the furniture again, this time searching for secret compartments or hidden drawers. In the main bedroom's wardrobe, she found a loose board at the back. Behind it, there was a sealed envelope. Margaret opened it carefully. It was a copy of Jack Parker's will dated August 15, 1955. The main clause was underlined in pencil. "I leave the entirety of Pine Ridge Farm to the first woman in the Parker family who demonstrates true love for this land and commits to preserving its legacy." The document was signed by Jack Parker and 2 witnesses with notarized signatures. It seemed completely legitimate. Margaret took her phone and researched the validity of old wills. She discovered that if it hadn't been contested or revoked, the document could still have legal force. She had a crazy idea, but one that was starting to make sense. If Elizabeth Parker had become a Parker through marriage, and if she had never officially claimed her rights to the inheritance, perhaps those rights still existed. And if Margaret Wilson could prove some legal connection to Elizabeth Parker, she might be able to claim the farm through the original will. It was a long shot, but worth investigating. First, she needed to find out more about what happened to Elizabeth Parker after she left the farm. Margaret drove into town and spent the afternoon at the county records office, searching through old documents. She discovered that Elizabeth Parker had moved to Denver in 1982, but found no records of her remarrying or changing her name. In the local newspaper archives, she found a 1985 notice mentioning Elizabeth Parker. It was a small classified ad. Elizabeth Parker, former resident of Pine Ridge Farm, wanted for inheritance matters. Interested parties, contact attorney Andrew Fletcher. Margaret felt her heart race. Elizabeth Parker had tried to claim the farm through the 1955 will. Exactly as she was thinking of doing, she searched the archives for more news on the matter, but found nothing. It was as if Elizabeth Parker had completely disappeared after 1985. When she returned to the farm in the late afternoon, she found Sebastian waiting on the porch. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Wilson. I need to speak with you. If it's about the property, I've already said I'm not leaving." "It is about that, yes, but perhaps I wasn't clear yesterday." Sebastian came down the porch steps and stood very close to her. "This farm is rightfully mine, and I will reclaim it, with or without your cooperation." Margaret felt a shiver of fear but tried to stay calm. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm warning you. You don't know who you're messing with. And you don't know who you're messing with." Margaret pulled a copy of the will from her pocket. "I found Jack Parker's will. The farm was never legally transferred to you." Sebastian snatched the paper from her hands and examined it quickly. His expression changed from surprise to anger. "Where did you find this?" "It was hidden in the house. Elizabeth Parker had made a copy before she left. This document is worthless. Elizabeth Parker forfeited any rights when she abandoned the property. That's for the courts to decide." Sebastian tore the copy of the will and threw the pieces on the ground. "You're playing with fire. I warned you about the dangers of this farm, but you didn't want to listen." "What kind of dangers?" "Accidents happen, especially to people who insist on staying where they're not welcome." Sebastian got into his pickup truck and sped off, kicking up a cloud of dust. Margaret gathered the torn pieces of the will. Fortunately, she had taken a photo with her phone before showing it to him. That night, she decided to take some precautions. She locked all the doors and windows of the house and piled empty cans behind the main door, so that any attempt to enter would make noise. She also installed an app on her phone that would record continuously during the night, hoping to capture evidence of any intrusion. At 2 in the morning, she was awakened by the sound of the cans falling. Someone had entered the house. Margaret remained motionless in the sleeping bag, listening. Heavy footsteps walked through the living room, very different from the light steps she had heard the night before. A flashlight beam swept the walls. There was definitely an intruder in the house, and he wasn't trying to be discreet. Margaret grabbed her phone and dialed the police, but found there was no signal. She remembered the coverage at the farm was spotty. The footsteps approached the area where she was. Margaret pretended to be asleep, but kept the phone recording. "I know you're awake," said a male voice she recognized as Sebastian's. "You'd better get up and talk to me." Margaret slowly sat up. "What are you doing in my house in the middle of the night?" "Your house?" Sebastian laughed. "This house is mine, and I'm tired of being patient." He shone the flashlight directly into her face, temporarily blinding her. "I came to get something that belongs to me and to give you one last warning. If you're talking about the will, I've already made copies. Tearing up the original didn't solve anything. I'm not talking about the will, I'm talking about something much more important." Sebastian walked over to the desk where Margaret had found the diary and started rummaging through the drawers. Elizabeth Parker hid something here before she left. Something that proves she had no right to the inheritance. What would that be? A confession. She found out she wasn't the legitimate daughter of the man she married. That she used fake documents to deceive my cousin. Margaret found the accusation absurd. That doesn't make sense. The letters show she lived here for 20 years. No one keeps up a charade for that long. You don't understand how some people are capable of lying to get what they want. Sebastian continued searching through the furniture. When he didn't find what he was looking for, he turned to Margaret with a threatening expression. "Where is it hidden?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "The confession. Elizabeth Parker left a letter confessing to the fraud. I know it's in this house. Even if such a letter existed, what would it change? She already lost the farm 40 years ago. It would change because you're following exactly in her footsteps. You came here with a sad story trying to get sympathy. Bought the property for a ridiculous price. Now you show up with copies of old wills." Margaret finally understood what Sebastian really thought. You think I'm trying to pull the same scam you believe she did? I think you two are two peas in a pod, and I won't let it happen again." Sebastian grabbed a chair and threw it hard against the wall. "You have until noon tomorrow to leave. After that, I can't guarantee your safety." He left the house, leaving the door open. Margaret trembled in the dark, trying to process what had happened. The situation was getting dangerous. Sebastian clearly wouldn't be satisfied with just threats, and she was completely isolated, with no nearby neighbors or cell phone signal. But something about his behavior didn't make sense. If he really believed Margaret Wilson was a scammer, why didn't he just call the police? Why not challenge the sale in court? His insistence on finding a supposed confession from Elizabeth Parker suggested that he himself knew his version of the story wasn't true. Margaret decided she wouldn't leave the farm without fully understanding what had happened there. She had a feeling she was very close to discovering important secrets, both about Elizabeth Parker and about Sebastian. The next morning, she drove to Mrs. Anderson's house to ask for help. The lady lived in a small but well-kept house, surrounded by flower gardens. "My dear, it's so good to see you. Come in, I'll make some coffee." Margaret told her about the nighttime break-in and Sebastian's threats. Mrs. Anderson listened with an increasingly worried expression. "That man has gone too far. He's always been troublesome, but I never thought he'd go this far." "Do you think he's really capable of harming me?" "I think he's capable of anything when it comes to that farm. He has a sick obsession with that property." He talked about a confession that Elizabeth Parker supposedly left, said she wasn't who she claimed to be. Mrs. Anderson laughed scornfully. "Complete nonsense. I knew Elizabeth for 20 years. She was a person of integrity, honest. She would never invent a false identity." "Then why does Sebastian insist on this version?" "Because he needs a justification for his actions. If he can prove that Elizabeth had no right to the inheritance, he can claim the farm for himself." Margaret drank her coffee thoughtfully. "Mrs. Anderson, do you know if Elizabeth Parker left any will or documents when she left?" "Actually, yes, I do. She asked me to keep some important things in case she ever wanted to retrieve them." Margaret nearly dropped her cup. "You still have these things?" "I do. Everything's stored in the attic. Elizabeth told me that if anyone from the Parker family ever came looking for the truth about the farm, I should give them the documents." "And would I qualify to receive them?" Mrs. Anderson smiled mysteriously. "I think so. Come, I'll show you." They went up to the house's attic, where Mrs. Anderson opened an old trunk. Inside was a wooden box with the name Elizabeth Parker engraved on the lid. "She made me promise to only open this box in the presence of someone who truly cared about the truth regarding the farm." Mrs. Anderson handed the box to Margaret, who opened it with trembling hands. Inside were more letters, some photographs, and a sealed envelope with the words, "To whoever finds this box." Margaret opened the envelope and read the letter aloud. "If you are reading this, it means you have managed to uncover at least part of the truth about Pine Ridge Farm. My name is Elizabeth Parker, and I lived on that property from 1963 to 1982. I leave this account so the truth does not die with me. Sebastian Parker always claimed that I had no right to my father-in-law's inheritance. The truth is the opposite. It was he who forged documents to try to take the farm. When I discovered this in 1981, he threatened me and sabotaged the property to force me to leave. The debts that led to my ruin were not caused by poor management or Benjamin's problems. They were the result of fraudulent loans that Sebastian took out in the farm's name using forged documents. When I tried to report the fraud, I discovered that Sebastian had bribed important people in town. I couldn't prove anything and was forced to leave the property to avoid being arrested on false charges. I enclose copies of all documents that prove Sebastian's fraud. If justice ever prevails, these papers will be the key to restoring the truth. Signed, Elizabeth Parker, legitimate heir of Pine Ridge Farm." Margaret finished reading with a racing heart. She examined the attached documents. They were loan agreements with clearly forged signatures, receipts for payments never made, and correspondence between Sebastian and people he had bribed. "My God," murmured Margaret. "Elizabeth Parker didn't lose the farm due to incompetence. She was the victim of an elaborate scheme." Mrs. Anderson shook her head sadly. I always suspected something was wrong. Elizabeth was too competent to have gone bankrupt like that. Why did you never reveal this before? Margaret made me promise I'd only give the documents to someone suffering the same kind of persecution, someone who would understand the importance of the truth. Margaret carefully organized all the papers. I need to take this to a lawyer. If these documents are authentic, Sebastian can be sued for fraud. Be very careful, my dear. If Sebastian finds out you have this evidence, he might do anything to get it back. Margaret thanked her and returned to the farm with the box of documents. Now she understood why Sebastian was so desperate to find a confession from Elizabeth Parker. He knew she had discovered his fraud and feared she had left evidence behind. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. When she reached the farm, Margaret found the house door wide open. Sebastian had returned and turned everything upside down. Broken furniture, drawers pulled out, papers scattered across the floor. But he hadn't found what he was looking for, because the important documents were with Mrs. Anderson. Margaret surveyed the damage. Besides the mess, Sebastian had cut the wires of the landline phone she had installed and damaged the car by slashing the tires. She was effectively trapped at the farm with no means of communication with the outside world. That's when she heard the sound of a pickup truck approaching. Sebastian was coming back, and this time he brought 2 more people with him. Margaret ran to the second floor and hid in the back bedroom, taking the box of documents with her. Through the window, she saw Sebastian talking to 2 men she didn't recognize. I want you to search every inch of this house, said Sebastian. There has to be a confession hidden somewhere. And if the woman doesn't want to leave, asked one of the men, convince her, do whatever it takes. Margaret felt her blood run cold. Sebastian had hired people to physically intimidate her. She needed to get out of the house without being seen. She remembered there was a window at the back of the second floor that led to the storage shed's roof. If she could reach it, she could climb down and escape through the woods. She put the box of documents in a bag and tied it around her waist. Carefully, she opened the window and stepped out onto the storage shed's roof. The metal was slippery from the morning dampness. Margaret moved inch by inch, trying not to make a sound. She was almost at the edge of the roof when she heard voices inside the house. There's no one on the ground floor. She must be hiding upstairs. Let's look. Margaret quickened her movements and reached the edge of the roof. The drop to the ground was higher than it seemed, about 10 feet. She hung from the edge and let herself drop, trying to cushion the fall with her legs. She managed it, but twisted her right ankle. Limping, she ran toward the woods behind the house. She needed to reach the road and ask someone for help. That's when she heard shouts coming from the house. She got away, searched the woods. Margaret hid behind a large tree and stood still. She could hear the men talking in the backyard. She must have headed toward the road. Let's go after her. Sebastian said she can't leave here with the documents. Margaret waited until she could no longer hear voices, then began moving through the woods toward Mrs. Anderson's house. The terrain was uneven and full of thorns, and her injured ankle made every step painful. It took almost 2 hours to reach the elderly lady's house. When she knocked on the door, she was exhausted and her clothes were torn by branches. My God, dear, what happened? Margaret quickly told her about the break-in and the pursuit. Mrs. Anderson brought her inside and tended to her injured ankle. Sebastian has completely lost his mind. You need to call the police. I'll try, but he has contacts at the local sheriff's office. Maybe it's better to go straight to Denver and look for a lawyer. I can lend you my car. It's old, but it runs well. Margaret hesitated. She didn't want to involve Mrs. Anderson more than she already had. He might find out you helped me. Don't worry about me. I'm too old to be afraid of Sebastian. Besides, I've kept Elizabeth Parker's secrets for 40 years. It's time for the truth to come out. Mrs. Anderson lent Margaret clean clothes and gave her money for the trip. She also wrote a letter of introduction to a lawyer she knew in Denver. Dr. Andrew Fletcher. He's the son of the lawyer Elizabeth Parker went to in the 1980s. If anyone can help, it's him. Margaret left for Denver in the late afternoon, driving Mrs. Anderson's old car. During the drive, she mentally organized everything she had discovered. Elizabeth Parker hadn't lost the farm due to incompetence or bad luck. She had been the victim of a fraudulent scheme orchestrated by Sebastian Parker, who forged documents and took out illegal loans in the property's name. When Elizabeth Parker discovered the fraud, she tried to report Sebastian, but he had corrupted important people in the region. Unable to prove anything, she was forced to abandon the farm. Now, 40 years later, Sebastian was trying to use the same tactics against Margaret Wilson. He had sabotaged the original sale of the farm to create a conflict situation, hoping she would give up and leave. But this time, there was documented evidence of his past frauds, and Margaret Wilson wouldn't give up without a fight. In Denver, she went straight to Dr. Andrew Fletcher's office. The lawyer was a man of about 60, with graying hair and a serious expression. "Mrs. Wilson, I read Mrs. Anderson's letter. It's a remarkable story." Margaret showed all the documents found in Elizabeth Parker's box. Dr. Andrew examined each paper carefully. "These documents are explosive. If they are authentic, Sebastian Parker committed serious crimes that haven't expired yet. So I can legally get the farm back? Not just that. You can sue Sebastian for fraud, document forgery, and emotional damages, and if we can prove he's repeating the same crimes against you, he could be jailed." Dr. Andrew explained that the first step would be to authenticate the found documents. Then, they would file a lawsuit requesting the annulment of all fraudulent transactions made by Sebastian. "But I must warn you, it will be a long and expensive process. Sebastian won't give up easily." "Doctor, I don't have much money. I spent everything on buying the farm. In that case, we can work on a contingency fee basis. We only get paid if we win the case." Margaret accepted the proposal and spent the next 2 days in Denver, helping the lawyer organize all the documentation. During this period, Dr. Andrew made some surprising discoveries. Elizabeth Parker had indeed tried to sue Sebastian in the 1980s, but her original lawyer dropped the case after receiving threats. More importantly, Elizabeth Parker had never officially renounced her rights to Jack Parker's inheritance. The 1955 will was still legally valid. "This means you have dual legal grounds," explained Dr. Andrew. "You can claim the farm both as the legitimate buyer and as the legal successor of Elizabeth Parker." "How am I the legal successor?" Elizabeth Parker had no children or close relatives. When she passed away, her inheritance rights reverted to the estate. Since you bought the property in good faith and have shown genuine interest in preserving the farm's legacy, you can claim succession." Margaret was confused. "She passed away when?" "Doctor, Andrew showed a death certificate dated 1987. Elizabeth Parker died in Denver, 2 years after trying to reclaim the farm. The official cause was heart failure, but there are reports that she was very depressed and ill." Margaret felt a deep sadness. Elizabeth Parker had fought until the end for that property, but died without being able to recover it. "So I'm literally trying to finish what she started." "In a way, yes, and with much better chances of success, because now we have the evidence that was missing back then." Dr. Andrew prepared a complex legal petition, challenging not only the legitimacy of Sebastian's possession, but also calling for a criminal investigation into his fraudulent activities. When everything was ready, Margaret returned to the farm region. She needed to deliver the court summons to Sebastian personally. She found him at the town fair, talking with other farmers. When he saw Margaret approaching, his expression changed to surprise and anger. "I thought you had left for good." "I came to deliver this." Margaret extended the court summons. "You are being sued for fraud, document forgery, and embezzlement." Sebastian quickly read the papers, and his face turned pale. "This is ridiculous. What evidence do you have?" "All the ones Elizabeth Parker gathered before she died. She documented every crime you committed." Elizabeth Parker was a mad woman. She died broke and forgotten. She died fighting for the truth. And now I'm going to finish her fight. Sebastian tore up the summons and threw the pieces on the ground. "It won't amount to anything. I have influential friends in this region." "Not this time. The lawsuit is being tried in Denver, far from your influence." Margaret left Sebastian in the middle of the fair and went to look for Mrs. Anderson. She needed to thank her for the help and return the borrowed car. She found the lady's house turned upside down with signs of a break-in. Mrs. Anderson was sitting on the porch with a bandage on her head. My God, what happened? Sebastian came here last night with 2 men. They wanted to know where you were and if I had more documents hidden. Did they hurt you? They pushed me against the wall when I said I didn't know anything, but I'm fine, dear. I've been through worse in my life. Margaret felt anger growing inside her. Sebastian was escalating the violence, now attacking a 78-year-old lady. I'll include this in the lawsuit. Assault against the elderly is a serious crime. They took some things, mainly old photographs I had of Elizabeth Parker. It's a good thing the important documents are with the lawyer. Margaret helped Mrs. Anderson tidy up the house and insisted that she stay with relatives in town for a few days until the situation was resolved. Don't worry about me. Worry about yourself. Sebastian is desperate now. He might do anything. I won't be intimidated. I've come too far to give up now. That night, Margaret returned to the farm for the first time in 4 days. The house was even more damaged than before. Sebastian had broken windows and torn up parts of the floor, searching for hidden documents. But there was something different. The house no longer seemed haunted or mysterious. It was as if the ghosts of the past had finally found peace. Margaret cleaned the main room and set up her sleeping bag again. This time, she slept peacefully all night. There were no strange footsteps, doors opening by themselves or furniture moving. It was as if Elizabeth Parker was resting in peace, knowing that someone would finally fight for the truth she couldn't establish in her lifetime. The next morning, Margaret was awakened by the sound of cars arriving. Through the window, she saw 2 police cars and an official vehicle parking in front of the house. An officer approached the porch. Ms. Margaret Wilson, I'm Sheriff Peterson from Denver. We have a search and seizure warrant for this property. Of course you may enter. What are you looking for? Evidence related to the case against Sebastian Parker. Dr. Andrew obtained a court order to investigate the house. The police officers spent the entire day examining every room of the farm. In the barn, they found documents hidden behind a false wall, including original contracts that Sebastian had forged. More importantly, they discovered a secret room in the basement of the house, where Sebastian had stored tools for document forgery and a typewriter identical to the one used in the fraudulent contracts. This is a complete forgery lab, commented the sheriff. Sebastian used the farm as a base for his criminal operations. Margaret was shocked to learn that Sebastian had been using her property for illegal activities all these years. By late afternoon, the police left with several boxes of evidence. The sheriff assured her there was enough material to convict Sebastian for multiple crimes. 2 weeks later, Sebastian was caught red-handed, trying to forge documents for other rural properties. The investigation revealed he had pulled similar scams on at least 5 farms in the region over the past few decades. Dr. Andrew called Margaret with the good news. The judge granted all our requests. The farm is officially yours, both by purchase rights and legal succession from Elizabeth Parker. Sebastian will have to compensate you for all damages caused. What about his other victims? They are all being reimbursed. Sebastian will have to return properties he fraudulently obtained and pay millions in compensation. Margaret felt immense relief. Finally, the truth had prevailed, but her greatest satisfaction came when Dr. Andrew shared the investigation's conclusion. We discovered something interesting about Elizabeth Parker. She had left instructions at a notary's office in Denver, stating that if anyone legitimately recovered the farm, part of her personal assets should be given to that person. What kind of assets? A savings account she'd maintained for 40 years. With interest and adjustments, it's now worth about $200,000. Margaret was speechless. Elizabeth Parker had continued saving money even after losing the farm, apparently hoping she might one day return or that someone would continue her fight. With the inheritance from Elizabeth Parker and the compensation paid by Sebastian, Margaret had enough resources to fully restore the farm. She hired a team of local workers and spent the following months overseeing the renovation. The house was painted white, just like in the old photographs. The roof was repaired, windows and doors were replaced, and the entire electrical system was rewired. Mrs. Anderson returned home and became a frequent visitor. She helped Margaret set up an improvised museum in one of the house's rooms, displaying Elizabeth Parker's photographs and letters. "It's important that people know the true history of this place," said Mrs. Anderson. 6 months after first setting foot on the farm, Margaret organized an opening celebration for the restored property. She invited all the local residents, including Sebastian's other victims, who had recovered their lands. During the celebration, Margaret announced her plans for the farm's future. "I want to turn this place into a shelter for women restarting their lives, a place where they can find peace, work, and hope." The idea was met with enthusiasm by the community. Several people volunteered to help. Margaret remembered the words of Jack Parker's will, "To the first woman of the Parker family who shows true love for this land and commits to preserving its legacy." She had shown that love and taken on that commitment. More than that, she had redeemed the memory of Elizabeth Parker and turned a place of suffering into a symbol of hope. 1 year later, Pine Ridge Farm housed 12 women starting over. There was a community garden, craft workshops, and an adult literacy project. Margaret married Dr. Andrew Fletcher, who moved to the farm and opened a public legal office in town, offering free services to people in need. Mrs. Anderson, at 79 years old, moved to the farm and became the grandmother to all the sheltered women. She told stories of the past and taught traditional recipes. "You know," Mrs. Anderson said to Margaret on a sunny afternoon, "I think Elizabeth Parker is happy wherever she is. She wanted this land to help people. That's exactly what's happening." Margaret agreed, watching the women working happily in the garden. The farm had found its true purpose. Sebastian was sentenced to 15 years in prison for multiple crimes. His property was auctioned off to pay compensation to the victims. Ironically, he lost everything trying to steal lands that never belonged to him. In the farm's library, Margaret kept a framed photo of Elizabeth Parker next to a plaque that said, "To Elizabeth Parker, who fought for the truth when no one believed her." Every night before bed, Margaret read a few pages from Elizabeth Parker's diary. It was a way of keeping alive the memory of the woman who had paved the way for her to find not just a home, but a life purpose. The farm was never haunted by mysteries or unexplained phenomena again. The nighttime noises turned out to be due to damaged structures that were repaired during the renovation. But sometimes on Sunday afternoons, when the wind blew through the renewed fields, Margaret had the impression of hearing echoes of happy laughter coming from the house, as if Elizabeth Parker was finally at peace, seeing her beloved farm flourish again. The two Margarets had lost their first husbands. Both arrived at that farm seeking a new beginning. Both faced persecution from Sebastian Parker. But while Elizabeth Parker was defeated by the circumstances of her time, Margaret Wilson was lucky to live in an era where truth could prevail over corruption. And so Pine Ridge Farm became what it always should have been, a place of hope, growth, and renewal. A place where women wounded by life could find strength to start over. Margaret woke up every day knowing she was in the right place, doing the right thing. She had found not just a house, but a true home. Not just a property, but a life mission. The farm that once seemed scary became a sanctuary of peace, and Margaret understood that the ghosts that haunted her in the past were just echoes of injustices that had finally been corrected. End of story. This story shows us that persistence and the search for truth are always worth it, even when the path seems impossible. Margaret Wilson could have given up at the first difficulties, but she chose to fight for her rights and ended up discovering a historical injustice that she could correct. Now tell us, do you believe Margaret made the right decisions? What would you do in her place if you found a property full of mysteries? Leave your opinion in the comments. We really want to know what you thought of this story. Thank you very much for your company. Don't forget to leave a like. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting stories like this one.